History remembers the victors, but its shadows hide the monsters. Tonight, we look past the heroes to the tyrants, the madmen, and the rulers who brought only chaos. These are tales of power unearned, sanity lost, and legacies written in blood and fear. Settle in, and try to sleep, if you can. These are the worst rulers in history. Our descent into darkness begins in the heart of the world's greatest empire, with a man named Gaius Caligula. On a warm August day in the year 12C, a child was born into the very center of power, his name Gaius Julius Caesar Germanicus. But history would give him a different name, a chilling whisper through the ages, Caligula. It was once a term of endearment, meaning little boots, given to him by the hardened legionaries who adored the boy marching beside his father, the beloved General Germanicus. For a fleeting moment, he was Rome's golden prince, the hope of an empire. But the boy who charmed the legions would soon descend into a chasm of madness, becoming a monster who would test the very limits of Rome itself. Gaius was the son of Germanicus, a general so popular he was seen as the true heir to Augustus, and Agrippina the elder, a woman of unshakable nobility. As a child, he was the army's mascot, a symbol of a brighter future. But the sun sets quickly in Rome. In 19C, Germanicus died under mysterious circumstances, his body racked with a sudden illness. Whispers slithered through the Senate, whispers of poison, with fingers pointing toward the reigning emperor, Tiberius, Gaius's own great-uncle. Germanicus's death shattered the family. Agrippina, fierce and protective, openly defied Tiberius, a fatal mistake. One by one, Caligula's family was erased. His mother and brothers were exiled, starved, or executed, victims of the emperor's chilling paranoia. Young Gaius alone was spared, summoned to the island of Capri to live under the watchful, predatory eye of the man who had destroyed his world. Capri was not an island of paradise. It was a den of paranoia and depravity. Here, the aging Tiberius ruled from the shadows, indulging in cruelties that would make a soldier blush. It was in this crucible of fear and vice that Caligula learned the brutal art of survival. He became a master of deception, hiding his rage behind a mask of obedience, charming the court while his soul curdled with a desire for vengeance. He watched, he learned, and he waited. In 37C, Tiberius died, and Rome erupted in celebration as Caligula was proclaimed emperor. The people wept with joy. They saw in him the ghost of his noble father, a beacon of hope after the cold, distant terror of Tiberius. And at first, Caligula played the part of the savior beautifully. He freed political prisoners, burned Tiberius's treason records, and showered the people with gifts and games. Rome became a city of endless celebration. It seemed a golden age was dawning. But then, less than a year into his reign, the Golden Prince fell gravely ill. A fever seized him, and for weeks he lingered at the edge of death. The empire held its breath. When he finally recovered, the man who stood up was not the same one who had fallen. The fever, it seemed, had burned away the charming prince and left a monster in his place. What followed was a reign of spectacular, terrifying insanity. Caligula's rule became a theater of cruelty. He bled the treasury dry on floating palaces and lavish feasts, once boasting he had spent the modern equivalent of billions in a single year. When the money ran out, he turned to extortion, accusing wealthy senators of treason simply to seize their estates. He declared himself a living god, demanding he be worshipped as Jupiter incarnate. He replaced the heads on statues of deities with his own and forced proud senators to grovel and kiss his feet. His madness had a creative, humiliating streak. He planned to appoint his favorite horse, Incitatus, as a consul, the highest office in Rome. The horse lived in a marble stable, ate from an ivory manger, and was draped in royal purple, a constant, living mockery of the political elite Caligula so despised. His cruelty was boundless. Executions became his personal entertainment. He was rumored to have engaged in incestuous relationships with all three of his sisters, becoming obsessed with Drusilla. When she died, he had her deified, forcing the entire empire into a period of mourning where to laugh was a capital crime. Perhaps most bizarre was his war on the sea. Believing himself a divine conqueror, he marched his legions to the English Channel and declared war on Neptune. The soldiers, in full battle armor, were commanded to wade into the surf and attack the water with their swords, before collecting seashells as the spoils of war, to be paraded in a triumph. But a throne built on terror is a fragile thing. The Praetorian Guard, the elite soldiers sworn to protect the emperor, had seen enough. On January 24, 41 C, as Caligula walked through a secluded palace corridor, a group of guards cornered him. They struck, and the man who called himself a god fell to the marble floor, bleeding and pleading for his life. He was stabbed over 30 times. His wife and young daughter were murdered shortly after, ensuring no heir could rise to avenge him. Thus ended the reign of Caligula, the emperor consumed by madness. His name would be etched in history not as a builder, but as a warning, a dark fable of what happens when absolute power falls into the hands of the unhinged. So sleep well, dear dreamer, and know that even the mightiest empire can be brought to its knees by the fevered dreams of a single, broken mind. Next, we journey from the marble halls of a fallen empire to the Sacred Heart of the Church, to find a sinner on the papal throne, Pope John XII. In the year 937 C, a boy named Octavianus was born into a world of chaos. The once mighty Holy Roman Empire was crumbling, and Rome was ruled not by emperors, but by powerful, feuding families. Octavianus was the son of Alberic II of Spoleto, the undisputed tyrant of Rome. He was born into immense privilege, but not an ounce of piety. History would remember him as Pope John XII, a man who would turn the sacred halls of the Vatican into his personal den of vice, a ruler whose sins were so profound they nearly shattered the faith of Christendom itself. This was the era known as the Saeculum Obscurum, the Dark Age of the papacy, where the throne of St. Peter was a political prize passed between the mistresses, daughters, and grandsons of corrupt aristocrats. John XII was the ultimate product of this rot. As his father Alberic lay dying, he forced the nobles of Rome to swear an oath that they would elect his teenage son as the next pope. At the tender age of 18, Octavianus was handed the keys to the kingdom of heaven. But instead of devotion, the Vatican found itself ruled by a reckless, immoral boy-king. From the moment he ascended in 955 C, John XII transformed the Lateran Palace, the holy residence of the popes, into a brothel. The sacred spaces where prayers should have echoed were filled with the sounds of gamblers, the laughter of courtesans, and the drunken songs of his cronies. Dice rattled louder than rosaries. His depravity was legendary. He was accused of open fornication within the hallowed walls of St. Peter's Basilica itself. Cardinals whispered in horror that he had toasted to the devil during feasts, invoked the names of pagan gods like Jupiter and Venus while gambling, and ordained a bishop in a stable. He was said to have turned the church into a harem, taking lovers from among noble women and nuns alike, his lust so insatiable that holy sites became scenes of unspeakable vice. But his sins were not confined to the flesh. He was a master of simony, selling church offices to the highest bidder. He blinded his own spiritual father, mutilated a cardinal who dared to criticize him, and gambled away sacred chalices and golden crucifixes on games of chance. He spent more time hunting with his dogs and falcons than he did celebrating Massachusetts. The leader of the Christian world had become the very embodiment of sin. This debauchery might have been ignored if he were a competent political leader, but he was a fool. In a desperate bid for military protection, he allied with Otto the Great, King of Germany, crowning him Holy Roman Emperor in 962 C. But almost immediately, the treacherous young pope betrayed him, secretly plotting with Otto's enemies. Otto, no fool, marched his army back to Rome in 963 C and convened a synod of bishops. John XII was formally charged with murder, perjury, adultery, and incest. He was deposed in absentia. But John was not so easily removed. He fled into the mountains, and when Otto left Rome, he returned at the head of a vengeful army, reclaiming the Vatican through bloodshed. His brief return was a reign of terror. He had the hands, noses, and fingers of his enemies cut off. His end, however, came not from an army, but from his own sin. In May of 964 C, at the age of just 27, he died suddenly. The circumstances were as scandalous as his life. Some chroniclers claim he suffered a fatal stroke in the bed of a married woman. A more popular and fitting rumor insists he was caught in the act of adultery and beaten to death by the woman's enraged husband. His papacy became a cautionary tale, a grim reminder that even the most sacred institutions are not immune to the darkest corners of human vice. His name is whispered not as a saint, but as a warning. So sleep well, dear dreamer, and remember that power, even when draped in holy robes, can be corrupted absolutely, leaving a stain that centuries cannot wash away. Our next tale of a crown ill-worn takes us to the rain-swept fields of England, to a king whose name would become synonymous with failure, King John. In the year 1166, in the grand halls of the Plantagenet dynasty, a child was born who was never meant to be great. He was John, the youngest son of the formidable King Henry II and the legendary Eleanor of Aquitaine. He was a prince born in the shadow of giants. His older brothers were warriors and statesmen. Richard, the famed Lionheart, was a living legend. John, however, was given no lands, no titles of substance, earning him the humiliating nickname his father bestowed upon him, John Lackland. This early neglect planted a seed of bitter resentment in him, a desperate ambition that would one day poison his entire kingdom. Though he lacked the military genius of Richard or the cunning of his other brothers, John possessed a different set of skills. He was manipulative, treacherous, and pathologically selfish. When his father died and Richard the Lionheart ascended the throne, the great warrior king promptly left England to embark on the Third Crusade. With the king away, the jackal began to play. John conspired with King Philip II of France, plotting to seize his own brother's throne. When Richard was captured and held for ransom on his journey home, John actively tried to keep him imprisoned. But Richard's legend was too powerful. He returned to England, and in a moment of astonishing mercy, he forgave his younger brother for his treason, stating, "He is only a child who has had evil counselors. It was a mistake England would pay for in blood and treasure." When Richard died in 1199, John's moment finally arrived. He seized the throne, but the crown did not grant him the qualities of a king. He was cruel where Richard had been chivalrous, cowardly where Richard had been brave, and profoundly incompetent where Richard had been a master strategist. His reign was a cascade of disasters. His first great failure was the loss of his family's ancestral lands in France. He inherited a vast empire, but through military blunders and diplomatic ineptitude, he lost the Duchy of Normandy and other key territories to the French king. This crushing humiliation earned him the scorn of his barons, who saw their own wealth and power dwindling under his failed leadership. His response was not to regroup, but to tax. Desperate to fund his failing wars, he bled England dry, extorting the church, seizing the lands of his barons, and imposing crushing taxes on the common folk. His paranoia and cruelty extended even to his own blood. His young nephew, Arthur of Brittany, had a stronger claim to the throne in the eyes of many. Fearing this rival, John captured the boy in 1203. Arthur was imprisoned and never seen again. The chilling rumor that spread across Europe was that John, in a drunken rage, murdered the boy with his own hands and cast his body into the river Seine. Whether he committed the act himself or ordered it, the stain of a kinslayer never washed away. As his failures mounted, so did the opposition. John made an enemy of the Church, quarreling so fiercely with Pope Innocent III that England was placed under a papal interdict for 6 years, a devastating punishment where all church services, from baptisms to burials, were forbidden. By 1215, the English barons could take no more. They rose in open rebellion, not merely to protest, but to cage the tyrant. At Runnymede they forced John to a negotiating table, compelling him to sign one of the most important documents in human history, the Magna Carta, the Great Charter. It was a revolutionary idea, declaring that not even the king was above the law. John signed it with a quill in one hand and a dagger behind his back. He had no intention of honoring it. Almost immediately, he appealed to the Pope, who declared the charter null and void, plunging England into a brutal civil war. John unleashed foreign mercenaries on his own people, burning towns and castles in a final, desperate rampage. The barons, in turn, offered the English crown to the Prince of France, so despised was their own king. As his kingdom crumbled, fate delivered one final, humiliating blow. While fleeing across a treacherous estuary known as the Wash, a sudden tide swept away his entire baggage train. Lost to the mud and sea were the crown jewels and all his royal treasure. Broken, sick, and now truly a Lackland, John retreated to Newark Castle. There, in October 1216, he succumbed to dysentery, dying in agony, abandoned by his allies and hated by his people. Few mourned him. Yet, in a profound twist of historical irony, the legacy of this disastrous king was the very document he tried to destroy. The Magna Carta would outlive him, becoming the foundation for constitutional law in England and inspiring the ideals of liberty and justice across the world. So sleep well, dear dreamer, and remember the story of King John, for it teaches us that sometimes, from the reign of the very worst of men, the seeds of the greatest ideas can unexpectedly grow. We now travel east to the vast, frozen expanse of Russia, to a ruler whose name became a synonym for terror itself, Ivan the Terrible. In the harsh Russian winter of 1530, a child was born in the gilded heart of Moscow who would forge an empire in fire and fear. His name was Ivan Vasilievich. At just 3 years old, his father died, making him the Grand Prince of Moscow. His mother acted as regent, but she too was dead before he was 8, likely poisoned. The boy prince was now an orphan, a pawn in the cruel games of the boyars, the powerful noble families of Russia. Ivan's childhood was a living nightmare. He grew up in the Kremlin, a palace filled with intrigue and betrayal. He was neglected, humiliated, and often starved by the boyars who ruled in his name. He watched them plunder the treasury, mock his authority, and murder his allies. These years of torment did not break him. They forged him into something hard and terrible. They filled his soul with a deep, abiding paranoia and a burning hatred for the nobility that would one day be unleashed upon all of Russia. But Ivan was no simple brute. He was fiercely intelligent, devouring books on history and religion. He saw himself not as a prince, but as an instrument of God's will, destined to transform Russia into a mighty, holy empire. In 1547, at the age of 16, he did something unprecedented. He declared himself Tsar of all Rus, a title derived from the Roman Caesar. It was a declaration of absolute, divine authority, placing him far above the boyars who had tormented him. His early reign was one of brilliant reform. He modernized the army, introduced new laws, and centralized the administration, breaking the power of the corrupt nobles. He expanded Russia's borders, conquering the great Tatar Khanates of Kazan and Astrakhan, securing the entire length of the Volga River. For a time, it seemed he would be Ivan the Great. But the demons of his childhood were never far away. His anchor to sanity was his beloved wife, Anastasia Romanova. Her sudden death in 1560 shattered him. Convinced the boyars had poisoned her, Ivan fell into a spiral of grief and vengeful madness. The darkness that had been festering within him finally broke free. In 1565, he unleashed his wrath. He created the Oprichnina, a state within a state, a personal dominion ruled by his own private army, the dreaded Oprichniki. Dressed in black, riding black horses, they were the Tsar's instruments of terror. Their insignia was a dog's head, to sniff out treason, and a broom, to sweep it away. They became a death squad, loyal only to Ivan, and they plunged Russia into a decade of bloodshed. The boyar families were purged. Their lands were seized, their fortunes confiscated. Thousands were arrested, tortured, and executed on the Tsar's slightest whim. Some were impaled, others boiled alive or torn apart by wild bears. The horror culminated in 1570 with the massacre of Novgorod. Believing the ancient city was plotting against him, Ivan led his Oprichniki in a month-long sack. Tens of thousands of men, women, and children were slaughtered. The streets ran red, and the Folkhof River was choked with bodies. As the years passed, Ivan's paranoia consumed him entirely. He saw enemies everywhere, even in his own family. In 1581, in a fit of uncontrollable rage during an argument, he struck his own son and heir, Ivan Ivanovich, on the head with his iron-tipped staff. The blow was fatal. The Tsar, realizing what he had done, cradled his dying son, howling in grief and madness. He had murdered his own future, and the future of his dynasty. The act broke him. On March 18, 1584, Ivan the Terrible died while preparing to play a game of chess. He left Russia leaderless and scarred. His death ushered in the time of troubles, a period of civil war, famine, and foreign invasion that nearly destroyed the nation he had built. He had forged an empire, but at the cost of his own soul and the peace of his people. So sleep well, dear dreamer, and remember that a ruler consumed by the ghosts of his past will inevitably create a nation of ghosts in his future. From the brutal certainty of the Tsar's court, we travel to an England of pageantry and poetry, a kingdom ruled by a man who saw himself as a living work of art, a king who would be undone by his own vanity, Richard II. On a cool spring day in 1367, a prince was born in Bordeaux who was destined for the throne. He was Richard, son of the valiant Black Prince and grandson of the mighty King Edward III. He was born into an England of chivalry and grandeur, but his reign would become a cautionary tale of betrayal, tyranny, and a spectacular fall. History would not remember him as a warrior like his father, but as the Golden King who believed he was untouchable, only to lose everything. Tragedy defined his youth. His legendary father died when Richard was just 9, and a year later, his grandfather the king also passed away. Suddenly, a 10-year-old boy was crowned King of England. Too young to rule, his kingdom was governed by a council of powerful nobles, including his ambitious uncle, John of Gaunt. Richard grew up a king in name only, overshadowed and controlled, and a deep resentment for these hardened old lords took root in his heart. His first true test came just 4 years into his reign. In 1381, England erupted in the Peasants' Revolt. Fueled by high taxes and feudal oppression, tens of thousands of rebels marched on London, burning palaces and executing the Archbishop of Canterbury. With his kingdom on the brink of collapse, the 14-year-old king did something extraordinary. he rode out to meet the furious mob himself. As the rebel leader Wat Tyler was struck down by the king's men, the crowd surged forward, arrows drawn. But Richard, with a courage that stunned all who saw it, cried out, "I am your captain! I am your king! Follow me!" He defused the crisis, a moment of astonishing bravery that promised a great future. But this heroism would curdle into arrogance. As Richard came of age, his belief in his divine right to rule became an obsession. He despised the old warrior nobility, seeing them as relics of a bygone era. He surrounded himself with a circle of favorites, young men who flattered his ego and shared his love for art, fashion, and lavish spectacle. He turned his court into a glittering stage, spending fortunes on extravagant clothes and grandiose projects, while the powerful barons of England watched, alienated and furious. This resentment boiled over in 1387. A group of powerful nobles, calling themselves the Lords Appellant, seized control of the government. They purged Richard's court, executing or exiling his closest friends. Richard, humiliated and powerless, was forced to submit. It was a bitter lesson he would never forget, and he would spend the next decade nursing his grudge, waiting for the perfect moment to exact his revenge. That moment came in 1397. With his power base secure, Richard struck back with chilling precision. He arrested the Lords Appellant, accusing them of treason. One was executed, another exiled, and a third murdered in his prison cell. Richard's vengeance was absolute. He declared that the law resided in his own breast, ruling as a tyrant. Parliament became his rubber stamp, and he funded his lavish lifestyle with forced loans and illegal taxes. He was no longer a king. He was a despot, ordained by God, untouchable by mortal men. His greatest mistake, however, was born of this arrogance. In 1399, his powerful uncle, John of Gaunt, died. Gaunt's son, Henry Bolingbroke, was in exile, but was the legal heir to his father's vast lands and fortune. In a stunning act of royal overreach, Richard seized the entire inheritance for the crown. It was a fatal miscalculation. He had not just stolen land. He had violated the sacred laws of inheritance that protected every nobleman in his kingdom. If the king could do this to the powerful Duchy of Lancaster, no one's property was safe. Henry Bolingbroke, furious and now with a legitimate cause, returned to England not just to reclaim his inheritance, but to reclaim the kingdom. The nobility, weary of Richard's tyranny, flocked to his banner. Richard, believing himself invincible, was on a campaign in Ireland. By the time he returned, it was too late. His kingdom had abandoned him. He was captured and imprisoned in the Tower of London. In a heartbreaking ceremony, he was forced to abdicate, to symbolically hand over the crown to his cousin, who would become King Henry IV. Richard was moved to the cold, lonely prison of Pontefract Castle. His final months are shrouded in mystery. By February 1400 he was dead, either starved to death by his captors or murdered on the new king's orders. His fall was immortalized by Shakespeare, who portrayed him as a tragic poet king, a man who lost his kingdom because he believed his own divine myth. So sleep well, dear dreamer, and remember the tale of Richard II. For it is a warning that those who believe they are above the law may find themselves waking in a prison, their golden crown forever lost. From a king who lost one throne, we turn to a queen who was promised two, but was destined to hold neither. Her story is one of beauty, betrayal, and blood, the tragic life of Mary, Queen of Scots. On a cold December night in 1542, a baby girl was born in Linlithgow Palace who was, from her first breath, a queen. Her name was Mary Stuart. Just 6 days after her birth, her father, King James V of Scotland, died, leaving his infant daughter the ruler of a wild and treacherous kingdom. She was a queen before she could walk, a crown placed upon a head that could not yet support it. Her very existence was a threat. King Henry VIII of England sought to seize her, to force a marriage to his own son and unite the crowns under his control. To protect her, at the age of just 5, Mary was spirited away to the glittering, sophisticated court of France. There, she was raised as a princess, betrothed to the young French heir, Francis. She grew into a woman renowned for her beauty, intelligence, and charm, a Catholic rose in the most powerful court in Europe. At 16, she married Francis, and a year later she was Queen of France. She was now a queen of 2 nations, standing at the pinnacle of power. But her happiness was tragically fleeting. Her young husband died suddenly in 1560, leaving Mary a widow at just 18. No longer welcome in the French court, she made the fateful decision to return to Scotland, a homeland she barely remembered. The Scotland she returned to was not the Catholic kingdom she had left. It was a nation torn apart by the Protestant Reformation, ruled by grim, feuding lords who saw their Catholic queen not as their savior, but as a dangerous outsider. Mary's reign was a tightrope walk over a pit of vipers, but her downfall would come not from politics, but from passion. Her choice in husbands proved to be her undoing. Her second husband, her cousin Lord Darnley, was handsome and ambitious but also a violent, arrogant drunkard. Consumed by jealousy, he orchestrated the brutal murder of Mary's private secretary, David Rizzio, having him stabbed to death in front of the heavily pregnant queen. The love she may have had for Darnley curdled into hatred. The marriage, and Mary's fate, was sealed in a flash of gunpowder. In 1567, the house where Darnley was staying was blown up in the middle of the night. His body was found in the garden, apparently strangled. The chief suspect was the dashing and dangerous Earl of Bothwell, a man Mary had grown increasingly close to. The scandal was immense, but it became catastrophic when, just 3 months later, Mary married Bothwell. Whether she was a willing accomplice in her husband's murder or a victim forced into the marriage by Bothwell, Scotland did not care. The people and the Protestant lords rose against her. She was imprisoned, forced to abdicate her throne in favor of her infant son, James, and eventually fled to England, throwing herself on the mercy of her cousin, Queen Elizabeth I. It was a fatal error. Elizabeth, ever wary of her Catholic rival who held a strong claim to the English throne, saw Mary not as a guest, but as a threat. For 19 years, Mary was a prisoner, moved from castle to castle, a queen in name only. She became the center of countless Catholic plots to assassinate Elizabeth and place her on the throne. Finally, in 1586, she was implicated in the Babington plot. Elizabeth's spymaster had all the proof he needed. Mary was tried for treason and sentenced to death. On February 8, 1587, Mary walked to the scaffold in Fotheringhay Castle, dressed in deep red, the color of Catholic martyrdom. She was regal and composed to the end. The execution itself was a gruesome, botched affair. The first blow of the axe missed her neck, striking the back of her head. The second did not sever it. Only with a third, hacking blow was the life of Mary, Queen of Scots, ended. In a final, macabre twist, when the executioner lifted her head to show the crowd, her auburn locks came away in his hand. It was a wig, hiding the thin, gray hair of a woman aged by years of suffering. Yet, even in death, Mary achieved a victory that had eluded her in life. Her son, James, would one day inherit the throne of England after Elizabeth's death, uniting the crowns of England and Scotland. The bloodline of the Queen Elizabeth had executed would rule over all of Britain. So sleep well, dear dreamer, and remember the story of the doomed queen, a testament to the fact that in the great Game of Thrones, the final move is sometimes played from beyond the grave. From the cold steel of the executioner's axe, we journey to a palace where the greatest threat was not a blade, but the slow, creeping decay of a mind lost in the cosmos. We travel to the heart of the Holy Roman Empire, to the strange and haunted reign of Emperor Rudolf II. In 1552, a child named Rudolf was born into the mighty Habsburg dynasty, destined to wear the imperial crown. He was raised not in Vienna, but in the suffocatingly rigid and devout Catholic court of his uncle, King Philip II of Spain. It was a world of unyielding order and piety, but it could not contain Rudolf's wandering mind. He was a quiet, introspective boy, plagued by what was then called melancholy, bouts of profound depression that would shadow his entire life. While his tutors drilled him on statecraft and war, his heart was elsewhere, in the stars, in the forbidden books of alchemists, and in the beautiful, bizarre wonders of the natural world. In 1576, he was crowned Holy Roman Emperor. His vast realm, teetering on the brink of religious war, needed a strong, decisive leader. Instead, it got a dreamer. Rudolf abandoned the political hub of Vienna and retreated to Prague, transforming his castle into a sanctuary of secrets, a laboratory of dreams. He was not a king who held audiences. He was a recluse who communed with magicians. Under Rudolf's reign, Prague became the occult capital of Europe. He gathered the most brilliant and eccentric minds of the age. He had the visionary astronomer Tycho Brahe build an observatory to map the heavens, and employed the brilliant Johannes Kepler to unravel the mathematical secrets of planetary motion. But alongside these men of science were figures from a stranger world, the English mystics John Dee and Edward Kelly, who claimed to speak with angels through a scrying mirror. Alchemists toiled in castle laboratories, funded by the emperor in their quest for the philosopher's stone, the key to eternal life and limitless gold. Rudolf's obsession was his Kunstkammer, his cabinet of curiosities. It was one of the greatest collections in the world, a microcosm of his fractured mind. It held priceless works of art alongside unicorn horns, celestial globes, bizarre mechanical automatons, and the legendary Codex Gigas, the Devil's Bible. He was a man desperately trying to possess and understand the entire universe, while the world he was meant to rule slipped through his fingers. While Rudolf locked himself away, his empire began to rot from within. He neglected diplomacy, ignored the growing Protestant rebellion in his lands, and allowed the simmering tensions that would soon explode into the catastrophic 30 Years' War to fester. His melancholy deepened into a crippling paranoia. He refused to marry or produce an heir, terrified of assassination and convinced that magic could grant him immortality. He withdrew from public life for years at a time, a ghost haunting his own palace, his behavior growing ever more erratic. By 1605, his family had had enough. His younger brother, Matthias, seeing the empire leaderless and on a path to ruin, led a revolt of the Habsburg archdukes. Rudolf, once the most powerful man in Christendom, was systematically stripped of his lands and authority. He became a prisoner in his own castle, a king ruling only over his collection of curiosities. In 1611, he was forced to abdicate the last of his titles. Abandoned and broken, he spent his final months wandering his silent galleries, speaking to the ghosts of a past that no longer existed. He died in January 1612, alone in his castle. In a strange and beautiful irony, this failed emperor left behind an invaluable legacy. Without his patronage, the scientific breakthroughs of Kepler and Brahe might have been delayed for decades. He was a terrible ruler, but a great patron. He was a man who dared to search for the meaning of life in the stars, even as his own world fell apart around him. So sleep well, dear dreamer, and remember that those who seek to unlock the secrets of the universe may find themselves consumed by them, becoming just another strange and forgotten relic in the cabinet of history. From an emperor who lost his grip on reality, we sailed to a distant island, to a queen whose grip on her kingdom was absolute, an iron fist of tradition in a world besieged by change. She was Ranavalona, the ruthless queen of Madagascar. She was not born to rule. In the late 18th century, she was born a commoner, but her father uncovered a plot against the king, and as a reward, she was adopted into the royal family and married to the heir, Prince Radama. When her husband became King Radama I, he opened Madagascar to the outside world. He forged alliances with the British, welcomed Christian missionaries, and encouraged European education and customs. But his wife, Ranavalona, watched this influx of foreign influence not with hope, but with a cold, simmering suspicion. She saw it as a cultural poison, a threat to the traditions and ancestral spirits of her people. When Radama died in 1828, a power struggle erupted. Ranavalona, with the backing of the army and traditionalist factions, moved with shocking speed. She executed her rivals, including the rightful heir, and seized the throne for herself. The commoner's daughter was now Queen Ranavalona I, and her first act was to declare war on the modern world. She systematically reversed every one of her husband's policies. She expelled the Christian missionaries, banned the practice of Christianity, and made European customs illegal. Her reign became a brutal, isolationist fortress. To enforce her will, she employed a terrifying method of justice, the Tangina ordeal. Anyone accused of a crime, from treason to practicing the forbidden Christian faith, was forced to swallow a poison extracted from the nut of the Tangina tree, followed by 3 pieces of chicken skin. If the accused vomited up all 3 pieces of skin, they were declared innocent. If they died from the poison or failed to vomit the skin, they were guilty. It was a horrific system of random justice that claimed tens of thousands of lives. Entire Christian communities were massacred. Suspected traitors were subjected to other cruel fates, being boiled alive, buried up to their necks and left for insects, or thrown from the high cliffs of Antananarivo. Her paranoia fueled endless purges, and countless more died in forced labor projects, building fortresses and palaces for their queen. Her kingdom was a land of fear, where loyalty was bought with blood. Yet, for all her internal brutality, Ranavalona was a master strategist in foreign policy. At a time when the scramble for Africa saw European powers carving up the continent, she kept Madagascar fiercely independent. She expertly played the British and French against each other. When a joint Anglo-French naval force attacked in 1845, her formidable army crushed the invasion. The heads of the defeated European soldiers were placed on pikes along the coast, a grim warning to any who would challenge her rule. For 33 years, she ruled with absolute power, a figure of both terror and patriotic pride. She was a tyrant to many of her own people, but she was also the queen who kept the colonial powers at bay. She died peacefully in her sleep in 1861. An unusually quiet end for a reign so steeped in violence. Her son, Radama II, immediately reopened the country, but the legacy of his mother was indelible. To this day, she remains one of history's most complex figures. Was she a bloodthirsty, paranoid tyrant? Or was she a pragmatic nationalist, a decolonizer before her time, who understood that the only way to fight the brutality of colonialism was with a brutal defense of her own? The answer is likely both. So sleep well, dear dreamer, and remember the tale of the ruthless queen, a story that reminds us that power is a double-edged sword, and the line between a monster and a savior is sometimes written only by the survivors. We now turn from the follies of individual minds to a crime of continental scale. An atrocity engineered not by a madman, but by a king of chilling, calculated greed. He was a modern monarch in a civilized European court, who built his fortune on a mountain of skulls. He was King Leopold II of Belgium. In the late 19th century, as the great powers of Europe carved up Africa in a frenzy of colonial ambition, the small nation of Belgium had been left behind. Its king, Leopold II, watched with burning envy. He was a man of immense ambition, trapped in a minor kingdom. He believed that greatness was measured in overseas possessions, and he was determined to have an empire of his own, by any means necessary. His target was the vast, mysterious Congo River basin. At the Berlin Conference of 1884, a meeting where European leaders drew lines on maps of a continent they barely knew, Leopold performed a masterstroke of public relations. He did not ask for a colony. He asked to be the steward of a humanitarian project. He promised to create the Congo Free State, a territory 76 times the size of Belgium, dedicated to protecting the native inhabitants from Arab slave traders, opening the heart of Africa to Christian missionaries, and establishing free trade. He presented himself as a philanthropist, a noble king bringing light to the dark continent. The world applauded his vision. It was all a lie. The Congo Free State was not a Belgian colony, nor was it free. It was the world's first and only privately owned continent, the personal property of King Leopold II. And he would rule it not as a king, but as a slave master. The charade of philanthropy quickly dissolved into a nightmare of exploitation. The true treasure of the Congo was not its people, but its resources. First, it was ivory. Then, with the invention of the inflatable bicycle tire and the automobile, a global boom in rubber created an insatiable demand. The Congo was rich with wild rubber vines, and Leopold saw his chance for unimaginable wealth. He declared all vacant land, which was virtually the entire country, to be his own, and he unleashed a private army, the force publique, to enforce his will. This army was made up of Belgian officers commanding native soldiers, often kidnapped from their own villages and brutalized into submission. Their task was to force every Congolese man, woman, and child to meet impossible quotas of rubber collection. The system they created was a vision of hell on earth. Villages were given quotas. To meet them, men were forced deep into the jungle for weeks at a time, often dying of starvation or disease. If they failed to bring back enough rubber, their wives and children were held hostage, starved, or mutilated. The signature atrocity of Leopold's regime was the severing of hands. To prove they were not wasting bullets on hunting animals, soldiers of the force publique were required to bring back the right hand of every person they killed. When quotas weren't met, they would simply cut the hands off living men, women, and even small children. The Congo became a vast labor camp. Villages were burned, populations were massacred, and a society was systematically destroyed. The death toll was apocalyptic. Historians estimate that in the 23 years of Leopold's personal rule, the population of the Congo was reduced by as much as 50%. Between 10 and 15 million people died from murder, starvation, exhaustion, and disease. It was a genocide fueled by greed. For years, Leopold concealed his crimes behind a wall of propaganda. But the truth began to leak out. Missionaries, shipping clerks, and disillusioned officials began to tell stories of the horror. An English journalist named E.D. Morel and a British diplomat named Roger Casement launched the world's first major international human rights campaign. Armed with photographs of mutilated children and first-hand testimony, they exposed Leopold's charade to the world. The international outcry was so immense that in 1908, Leopold was forced to sell his private continent to the Belgian state. He died a year later, one of the richest men in the world, having never set foot in the Congo and never facing a single day of justice for his crimes. He used his blood money to adorn Belgium with grand parks and museums, earning the nickname the Builder King, from a public who remained largely ignorant of the source of his wealth. So sleep well, dear dreamer, And remember the story of the king who owned a continent, for it is a chilling lesson that the greatest of evils are often committed not with a crazed scream, but with the quiet, calm signature on a balance sheet. Our final journey takes us back to the heart of Rome, to an emperor who inherited a golden age and chose to trade it for the fleeting glory of the circus. He was the son of a philosopher, who chose to live as a beast. He was Commodus, the Gladiator emperor. In the year 161 C, a child was born who represented the culmination of an era. He was Commodus, the son of the great Marcus Aurelius, the last of the 5 good emperors. For nearly a century, Rome had been ruled by wise, adopted heirs who had brought it to the zenith of its power and prosperity. Commodus was the first emperor in 100 years to be born in the purple, the natural son of a reigning monarch. He was the heir to a philosopher king, and the hopes of the entire empire rested on his shoulders. He grew up on the northern frontier, surrounded by the grim reality of his father's wars against the Germanic tribes. But while Marcus Aurelius was a man of duty, discipline, and stoic philosophy, his son was a creature of vanity, indulgence, and profound narcissism. The father's virtues did not pass to the son. In 180 C, Marcus Aurelius died, likely from the plague, in his military camp. His final act was to commend his son to his most trusted advisors, begging him to complete the war and secure the empire's borders. Commodus did the opposite. Within weeks, he declared victory, signed a hasty and dishonorable peace treaty, and abandoned his father's life's work. His only desire was to return to Rome and bask in the glory he had not earned. His reign was a study in imperial neglect. He had no interest in governing, in law, or in the military. He handed the reins of the empire to a series of corrupt favorites, who bled the treasury dry and terrorized the Senate, while Commodus indulged his fantasies. He saw himself not as a statesman, but as a celebrity, a physical god who deserved the adoration of the masses. His true passion, the obsession that would define his reign and seal his infamy, was the gladiatorial arena. He became convinced that he was the reincarnation of the demigod Hercules. He began appearing in public dressed in a lion's skin, carrying a club. This obsession soon moved from costume to combat. Commodus, the emperor of Rome, began to perform in the Colosseum as a gladiator. It was a spectacle of profound shame for the Roman elite. The emperor, the sacred heart of the empire, was debasing himself in an entertainment meant for slaves and criminals. His performances were a carefully staged farce. He would fight terrified, often crippled opponents who were armed with wooden swords, or slaughter helpless, exotic animals like giraffes and ostriches from a safe platform. For each appearance, he charged the Roman treasury an exorbitant fee, bankrupting the state to applaud his own ego. His megalomania grew with each performance. He renamed Rome Colonia Commodiana. He renamed the months of the year after his own various titles. The Senate, terrified of his paranoia and his executioner, was forced to declare him a living god. He was no longer an emperor. He was the star of his own grotesque, empire-wide reality show. But an emperor who rules by fear will eventually be consumed by it. By 192 C, his inner circle had had enough. His mistress, his chamberlain, and the prefect of the Praetorian Guard conspired to kill him. On New Year's Eve, they gave him poison wine. But Commodus, having vomited up the poison, survived. Desperate, the conspirators sent in the one man the emperor trusted completely, his personal wrestling partner, an athlete named Narcissus. He found the emperor in his bath and, with the strength of a professional wrestler, strangled the life out of the man who called himself Hercules. His death was celebrated. The Senate immediately declared him a public enemy, and his statues were torn down. The golden age of the Antonines was over, and the reign of Commodus had plunged the Roman Empire into a new era of civil war and instability from which it would never fully recover. So sleep well, dear dreamer, and remember the tale of the Gladiator Emperor. It is the final, tragic lesson that the greatest empire in the world can be brought to ruin, not by a foreign army, but by the rod of narcissism, when a man who is given everything chooses to be nothing more than a bloody spectacle. And so, our chronicle of chaos comes to a close. We have walked through the blood-soaked halls of history, from the paranoid palaces of Rome to the frozen courts of Russia, from the shores of a stolen continent to the heart of a holy sea. We have seen how the crown can be a poison, how absolute power can forge a monster, and how the legacy of a single, terrible reign can leave scars that last for centuries. These are the ghosts of history, the cautionary tales that whisper to us from the pages of the past. They remind us that the throne is only as noble as the one who sits upon it, and that the darkest shadows are often cast by the brightest crowns. Thank you for joining us on this long journey into the night. But history is a vast and haunted landscape, and our list is far from complete. Who do you believe was the worst ruler of all time? Was there a monster we failed to mention? Let us know in the comments below. The discussion is often as fascinating as the history itself. If you appreciate these deeper dives into the shadows of the past, a like is always a welcome signal for us to continue. And if you haven't already, consider subscribing and ringing the notification bell, so you won't miss our next descent into history's forgotten chapters. Until next time, sleep well, and may your dreams be more peaceful than their reigns.